Tom had always wanted a quiet place away from the busy city. For 30 years he worked in a noisy factory where machines never stopped and supervisors shouted all day. Every evening he dreamed of living somewhere peaceful, where the only sounds would be birds singing and water touching the shore. His wife Maria also dreamed of leaving the city. She had been a teacher for many years, and though she loved her students, the long hours and heavy traffic drained her energy. She often told Tom that when they grew older, she wanted to spend her mornings in a garden and her evenings near water. For many years they saved money. They did not go on big trips, they did not buy new cars, and they lived in a small apartment so they could put every extra coin into their savings. Their friends sometimes asked why they were so careful, and Tom always smiled and said, "Because one day we will live by a lake." When Tom finally retired and Maria left teaching, they began looking for the right place. They searched for months, visiting towns and villages, walking through houses that never felt quite right. Some were too far from shops, some were too close to highways, some were too expensive, and some had too many rules. They wanted land that was their own, a house that was simple and a view that would make them smile every morning. One spring afternoon, their real estate agent called. She said there was a small house near Lakeview Lake that had just been listed. It was not inside the Lakeview neighborhood, but right outside the boundary line. The house stood on its own land and it had a clear view of the lake. Tom and Maria drove there the next day. The moment they stepped out of the car, Maria took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine trees and water. Birds flew above them and the sound of waves touched the shore. The house was plain but strong, painted white with green shutters. The yard was open with tall trees on each side, and at the back was a narrow wooden porch that looked directly over the lake. Tom walked down to the water's edge and felt peace in his heart. "This is it," Maria whispered. "This is home." They learned from the agent that the property was outside the Lakeview HOA. The neighborhood across the road was managed by an HOA, which had many rules, but this house was not part of it. Tom and Maria liked that. They had no interest in paying fees every month or asking permission just to paint a wall. They wanted freedom to enjoy their land the way they chose, so they signed the papers, and within weeks the house was theirs. The first days felt like a dream. Maria planted roses and daisies along the walkway, humming as she worked in the soil. Tom cleaned an old fishing boat he had owned for years, set it into the water, and spent his mornings catching fish. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun go down, feeling the peace they had worked so hard for. Their new neighbors seemed kind. A man named Paul, who lived 2 houses down, brought them fresh bread to welcome them. An older woman named Ruth waved whenever she passed and sometimes stopped to chat about the weather. For a while, everything seemed perfect, but one neighbor was different. Her name was Karen. She was the president of the Lakeview HOA, and she was known for her strict nature. She did not smile when she saw Tom and Maria moving in. Instead, she stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching every detail. A week after they arrived, Karen came to their door. She carried a large folder and wore a stiff jacket even though the day was warm. Her walk was quick and her eyes sharp. "Good morning," she said, though her tone was not warm. "I am Karen. I am the head of the Lakeview Homeowners Association. I make sure everything around this lake follows the proper standards." Maria, always polite, smiled. "Good morning. Nice to meet you. We are Tom and Maria." Karen did not waste time on small talk. She opened her folder and placed a sheet of paper on the porch railing. "These are the rules of the HOA. You need to sign here and here. Dues are $200 each month. Your yard must stay trimmed, trash bins hidden, boats approved, and house paint must be checked with us." Tom frowned. "We are not in the HOA. Our property is outside your community." Karen's lips pressed together. "Everyone around the lake is part of the HOA. That is the only way to keep the community beautiful." Maria answered gently. "When we bought this house, we were told it is not in the HOA. That was important to us. We are happy to care for our land, but we will not join." Karen's voice grew sharp. "That is not acceptable. All who live near this lake must follow our rules. If you refuse, you will make things difficult." Tom stood straight. "We worked for many years to live in peace. We do not need your rules." Karen gathered her papers and walked away quickly, muttering that the lake would suffer because of people like them. Tom and Maria thought that might be the end of it, but it was only the beginning. In the following days, Karen returned often. She walked around their yard with a small notebook, writing notes about the roses Maria had planted. She measured Tom's boat and said it was too wide for the lake. She knocked on their door one evening to complain that their porch light was too bright each time Maria stayed calm and reminded her that they were not in the HOA. Each time Karen shook her head and said rules were rules, Tom grew angry but tried not to show it. He told Maria, "If we ignore her long enough, maybe she will stop." Maria hoped so too, but Karen did not stop. One Saturday morning, Tom was fixing his fishing nets while Maria watered the garden. Suddenly, 2 police cars pulled into their driveway. Tom froze, and Maria lowered the watering can, confused. Karen stood beside the cars, arms folded, a smile of victory on her face. The officers stepped out. One was tall with a sheriff's badge on his chest. The other was younger, carrying a small notebook. Karen pointed at Maria. "This woman refuses to join our HOA. She is breaking our laws. You need to handle this now." Maria's heart beat fast, but she stood tall. "Officers, our property is not in the HOA. We have no obligation to join. We bought this land because it was free from those rules." The sheriff looked at Karen calmly. His voice was firm but polite. "Ma'am, before we do anything, I need to see your orders." Karen blinked. "My orders? I am the HOA president. My word is law here." The sheriff crossed his arms. "That is not how the law works. If you are asking us to enforce something, you must show the legal orders that give you authority over this property. Do you have them?" Karen opened her folder and flipped through pages quickly. Her hands shook as she searched for something to prove her claim. But page after page showed only HOA meeting notes, yard regulations, and newsletters. There was nothing that gave her control over Tom and Maria's land. The sheriff waited patiently. Then he said, "If you have no orders, then you have no case." Tom and Maria exchanged a glance. For the first time since they moved, they felt that someone was standing on their side. The driveway was quiet for a moment. The tall sheriff kept his arms crossed while Karen shuffled through her papers, her confident smile gone. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Tom and Maria, then back at Karen. Tom stood near the porch, steady but watchful. Maria folded her hands together to keep them from trembling. She had never been in a situation like this, and though she knew they had done nothing wrong, having police cars in their yard made her heart pound. Finally, the sheriff spoke. "Ma'am, property law is very clear. If a house is not written into the association documents, the HOA has no power over it. This land is private. Unless you have court orders or property deeds that prove otherwise, you cannot force these folks to join your group." Karen's face turned red. "But they are ruining the harmony of our lake. We cannot have people painting houses whatever color they like. We cannot have random boats on the water. That is chaos." The sheriff kept his voice calm. "Wanting order is one thing, but you cannot step beyond your legal boundary. If you continue harassing these homeowners, you may be the one facing complaints." Maria felt a small wave of relief. She looked at Tom and he gave her a slight nod. Karen snapped her folder shut. "This is not over," she hissed, glaring at Tom and Maria before turning back to her car. The sheriff turned toward Tom and Maria. His expression softened. "You two are fine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If she comes again with threats, call the county office or call us. She has no authority here." "Thank you, officer," Maria said, her voice quiet but grateful. The sheriff gave a short nod and walked back to his car. The younger officer followed. Both vehicles rolled down the driveway, leaving dust in the air. When they were gone, Karen's car sped away too, her tires kicking gravel. Tom exhaled deeply. Well, that was something. Maria set the watering can down and sat on the porch steps. I did not expect her to bring the police. She must really believe she owns the whole lake. Tom shook his head. People like that believe rules matter more than people. But will not be bullied. This is our land. For the rest of the day, Tom and Maria tried to return to their normal routine. Tom went fishing. Maria worked in her flower beds, but the peace was not the same. Every sound of a car on the road made them look up, half expecting Karen to appear again. That evening, Paul from down the road stopped by. He had seen the police cars earlier and wanted to check in. He brought a basket of apples from his tree. I thought I'd come by and make sure you're all right, he said. Word travels fast around here. Maria invited him to sit on the porch. Tom told him the whole story, from Karen's demands to the sheriff's warning. Paul shook his head. That woman has been trouble for years. She likes control. Most of us just keep our heads down and follow her rules to avoid conflict. But you two are in a rare spot. Your land is not under her authority. She cannot stand that, Maria frowned. She will not stop easily, will she? No, Paul admitted. But the sheriff's words might slow her down. If she keeps pushing, you have the law on your side. Still, you should be careful. She knows how to stir trouble. After Paul left, Tom and Maria sat quietly, watching the moon reflect on the lake. It should have been peaceful, but Maria kept replaying Karen's angry words. Tom put his arm around her shoulders. We came here for peace, he said, and we will have it no matter what she tries. The next week was calmer. Karen did not appear for several days. Tom used the time to repair the small dock at the edge of the water. He laid fresh boards and painted the rails white. Maria planted herbs near the kitchen window and read books on the porch. For a moment it almost felt as if life was returning to the way they had dreamed it. But Karen was not done. One morning, Maria opened the mailbox and found a thick envelope. Inside were several letters from the Lakeview HOA. The first was a notice demanding payment of dues for the past 2 months. The second was a warning about Tom's boat, claiming it was unregistered and a hazard. The third accused them of failing to keep their yard in community-approved condition. Maria sighed and brought the letters to Tom. He read them slowly, shaking his head. None of this applies to us. She is wasting paper. But Karen's plan became clear a few days later. A man in a suit came to the door carrying a clipboard. He introduced himself as a representative of a collections company. He said the Lakeview HOA had reported unpaid dues and that they would take further steps if the money was not paid. Maria's eyes widened. We do not owe anything. Our home is not in the HOA. The man looked uncomfortable. That may be so, but they have filed it with us. If you want it cleared, you will need to prove your case. Tom's voice grew firm. We will not pay a penny. You can tell them to stop sending lies. The man shrugged and left, but his visit left Maria shaken. She worried about their credit, about bills arriving that they did not owe, about how far Karen would go. That evening, Tom called the sheriff's office and explained what had happened. The sheriff himself returned the call. His voice was steady. She is overstepping, he said. Send copies of every letter and every notice to the county clerk. Keep records of everything. If she files false claims, it will come back on her. Tom thanked him and promised to keep a folder with every paper Karen sent. Days passed and Karen's attempts continued. HOA newsletters appeared in their mailbox with notes written in bold ink saying final warning. Strange cars drove slowly past their house, their drivers taking pictures of the yard and dock. One afternoon, Maria caught Karen herself standing on the edge of their property, snapping photos of the roses. Maria walked over firmly. You are trespassing. Please leave. Karen gave a cold smile. Just collecting evidence. This will all go to the board. Maria's voice did not shake. Your board has no authority here. Leave now or I will call the sheriff again. For a moment, Karen hesitated. Then she walked off, her shoes crunching on the gravel, muttering about lawless neighbors. That night, Tom and Maria talked for a long time. Maria was tired of the stress, but she also refused to give in. Tom was determined not to be bullied. We worked too long for this dream, he said. We will not let her destroy it. We will fight if we must. The fight was closer than they knew. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from a county office. It said a formal complaint had been filed by the Lakeview HOA, claiming Tom and Maria's property was illegally excluded from the association and demanding that the county re-examine the property lines. Maria read it twice, her hands shaking. She's trying to change the map itself. Tom clenched his jaw. Then we will meet her on the map. If she wants a fight in court, we will be ready. They both knew the battle was only beginning, but they also knew they were not alone. The sheriff had given them advice, Paul had offered support, and the truth was on their side. As Tom looked out at the lake that evening, he promised himself something. No matter how far Karen went, he would stand firm. This land was theirs, this dream was theirs, and they would not let anyone take it away. The letter from the county sat on the kitchen table like a heavy stone. Tom read it 3 times, and each time his face grew harder. Maria sat across from him, twisting her hands together. It says we must attend a county hearing, Tom said slowly. Karen has filed a complaint that our house was left out of the HOA by mistake. She claims the property line was drawn wrong, Maria shook her head. That house has been here for years. How could it be a mistake? Tom sighed. It is not a mistake. It is a game. She wants to scare us into joining by dragging us into legal trouble. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Tom and Maria spent those days gathering every paper they had. They found the deed to their house, which clearly stated that their property was outside the HOA boundaries. They found maps from the county office showing the official lines. Maria organized everything into a folder, neat and clear. Paul came over one evening and looked at the documents. You are solid, he said. That land was never part of the HOA, everyone knows it. Karen is just trying to twist things. Maria frowned. But what if the county believes her? Paul shook his head. They will not. She has no real case. She only has noise. Just stay calm, show your papers, and the truth will stand. The morning of the hearing, Tom wore his best shirt, and Maria dressed neatly. They drove to the county building, hearts heavy but determined. The meeting room was small, with long tables and a raised bench for the county officers. Karen was already there, sitting straight with her folder of papers, her expression sharp and confident. When Tom and Maria walked in, Karen gave them a tight smile. I hope you are ready to accept reality, she whispered. Maria looked at her calmly. We are ready to show the truth. The county officer, a gray-haired man named Mr. Davis, began the meeting. We are here to review the complaint filed by the Lakeview Homeowners Association regarding the property of Tom and Maria. The HOA claims this property should be included in the association. The homeowners claim otherwise. We will hear from both sides. Karen spoke first. She stood, smoothing her jacket, and laid out her argument. She said the lake must remain under one set of rules. She claimed the property line that excluded Tom and Maria's house was an error years ago. She waved her papers and said if the county did not act, the whole lake would fall into disorder. When she finished, she sat with a look of victory. Mr. Davis turned to Tom and Maria. You may present your side. Tom stood holding his folder. His voice was steady. Sir, we bought this house because it is outside the HOA. The deed is clear. The maps are clear. This is our land and it is private. We respect our neighbors, but we do not want or need to be in the HOA. Maria handed the papers to the officer's assistant, who passed them to Mr. Davis. He studied them carefully. The maps showed the property line. The deed carried signatures and dates. Everything matched. After a long silence, Mr. Davis looked up. This property is not part of the HOA. The complaint has no standing. The case is closed. Maria felt a wave of relief. Tom squeezed her hand under the table. Karen shot up from her seat. You cannot just ignore this. This is wrong. Mr. Davis's voice grew firm. Ma'am, the documents are clear. The property is private. If you continue to harass these homeowners, you may face legal action yourself. Do you understand? Karen's face turned pale, but she said nothing. She gathered her papers and stormed out of the room. Outside the building, Tom and Maria stood in the sunlight. Breathing easier than they had in weeks, Maria whispered, It is finally over. But Tom, looking toward the parking lot where Karen's car disappeared, shook his head. With someone like her, nothing is ever over. She lost today, but she will be back. He was right. In the days that followed, Karen changed her tactics. She no longer sent letters demanding dues. She no longer spoke directly to Tom and Maria. Instead, she began spreading rumors. One neighbor told Maria, Karen says you plan to build a dock that will block the lake path. Another said, She claims your boat leaks oil into the water. Someone else whispered, She told us you might rent your house to strangers. Each rumor was false, but it spread unease. Neighbors who had once smiled now looked uncertain. Some stopped waving. Some avoided conversation. Maria felt the change keenly. She loved talking to people, sharing flowers and exchanging recipes. Now she felt eyes on her wherever she went. Tom grew angry. She is trying to turn the town against us. One evening, Paul came over, his face troubled. I need to warn you. Karen is telling the board that you are dangerous to the lake. She wants them to vote on a petition to force the county to reconsider. Maria sighed. We already won the case, Paul nodded. Yes, but she will not let go. She wants to exhaust you until you give up. Tom leaned forward. Then maybe it is time we stop waiting and start acting. We cannot spend the rest of our lives reacting to her tricks. Maria looked at him. What do you mean? Tom's eyes were firm. If she can play games with the county, then we can play by the same book. We can protect ourselves with the law. If she trespasses again, if she spreads lies, if she files false papers, we will take action against her." Maria thought about it long into the night. She had always believed in patience and kindness, but patience had not stopped Karen. The next morning, Maria made a decision. She went to the county office herself. She filed a formal complaint about harassment. She brought copies of every false letter, every demand, every notice of dues. She included a written statement about Karen trespassing on their land to take photos. The clerk looked through the thick folder. "This is serious," he said. "We will review it carefully. If the sheriff supports your claim, this may lead to restrictions against the HOA president." When Tom heard, he felt proud. That is the right step. She wants to trap us with rules. We will show her what real rules look like. For a few weeks, life grew quieter again. Karen seemed to avoid them, though they often saw her car slowing near their driveway. Tom and Maria continued their routines. Tom painted the small dock. Maria harvested herbs, and together they watched the sun set across the lake. But peace was fragile. One Saturday morning, they awoke to the sound of heavy engines. Looking out the window, they saw 3 trucks parked near their driveway. Men in work uniforms were unloading posts, cement bags, and tools. Tom stepped outside quickly. "What is going on?" One of the men pointed to a work order. "We were told to build a boundary fence here, sir." "HOA request." Maria's face paled. "But this is our land." Before Tom could reply, Karen's car pulled up. She stepped out, her chin high. "This fence will mark the real community boundary. Your property will be inside from now on. The board has voted." Tom clenched his fists, but before he could speak, the sound of another vehicle came down the road. It was the sheriff's truck. He stepped out, walking with steady steps, his badge shining in the morning sun. He looked at the workers, then at Karen, then at Tom and Maria. His eyes narrowed. "Before anything happens here," the sheriff said, his voice carrying authority, "I need to see the orders." Karen froze. The morning air was sharp with the smell of fresh cement, and the sound of clattering tools filled the driveway. The workers looked uneasy as the sheriff stood between them and Karen, his boots planted firmly on the gravel. His eyes did not leave Karen's face. "Orders," he repeated. "If you want to build anything here, if you claim authority over this property, then show me your orders. Show me the signed documents, the county approval, the legal right." Karen held her folder close to her chest. Her face, usually sharp with confidence, now looked strained. "The board voted," she said. "We agreed this property should be inside the HOA. This fence is proof of that decision." The sheriff's voice was steady, but there was no softness in it. "A board vote does not give you power over private property. The county has already reviewed this. The line is clear. This land does not belong to your association. If you cannot show me signed legal orders, you are trespassing." The workers glanced at one another. One man set down his hammer. Another shook his head and stepped back. Tom stood beside Maria, his hands clenched but his voice controlled. "Sheriff, we never asked for this fence. We never approved it. They came here without our permission." The sheriff nodded once. He turned back to the workers. "Gentlemen, you are on private property. Pack your tools and leave. If you stay, you may be charged for trespassing." The men did not argue. They loaded their posts and cement bags back into the trucks, glancing nervously at Karen as they worked. Karen's voice rose, sharp and shrill. "You cannot do this. You are letting them ruin the whole lake. You are letting them break the community spirit." The sheriff looked at her calmly. "I am letting the law stand. The next time you bring workers here without permission, I will not stop with words. You will face charges. Do you understand?" Karen's lips trembled. She clutched her folder tighter, then spun on her heel and stormed back to her car. Her tires squealed as she drove away. The sheriff stayed for a moment longer, his eyes kind when he looked at Tom and Maria. "You two are not alone. Keep your records. If she tries again, call me. The law is on your side." Maria's voice was quiet but firm. "Thank you, Sheriff. You do not know how much this means to us." He gave a short nod, then left. The sound of his truck faded down the road, leaving the air silent again. Tom wrapped his arm around Maria's shoulders. "She is getting desperate. That fence was her biggest move yet." Maria leaned against him. "She will not stop. But we cannot let fear take our peace. This is our home." For the next few days, life returned to a rhythm. Tom repaired his dock once more, sanding the boards and painting them smooth. Maria baked bread, watered her flowers, and shared jars of jam with Paul, who stopped by often to check on them. But the shadow of Karen's actions lingered. Every car that passed made Maria glance out the window. Every letter in the mailbox made her heart beat faster. Paul tried to lift their spirits. One evening, he sat with them on the porch, sipping coffee as the sun dipped behind the trees. "She is losing ground," he said. "First the county told her no, then the sheriff told her no. People are starting to see through her." Tom frowned. "Some neighbors still avoid us. They believe her lies." Paul nodded slowly. "Yes, but others are tired of her control. You are not the only ones she has pushed around. She has fined people for leaving bicycles outside, for having the wrong color curtains, even for children making chalk drawings on driveways. Some folks are quietly cheering for you." Maria gave a small smile. "That gives me hope. Maybe if we hold strong, others will too." But Karen was not ready to give up. A week later, Maria walked down to the dock early in the morning. She wanted to watch the sunrise over the water. The air was calm, the lake still like a mirror. But as she stepped closer, she stopped in shock. Floating near the dock were several plastic bags filled with trash. Empty bottles, food wrappers, and even broken glass drifted in the water. Maria gasped. She fetched Tom quickly. He came down, his face hardening as he saw the mess. "She is trying to make it look like we are polluting the lake," he said. Together they cleaned the water, pulling out each bag carefully. Tom disposed of the glass safely, and Maria washed the dock with a bucket of fresh water. But the sense of violation was heavy. Later that day, the sheriff stopped by on his own. He had heard from Paul that trash was found at the dock. Tom showed him the bags they had pulled out. The sheriff examined them, frowning. "This is no accident. Someone wanted to frame you. I cannot say who, but I have a good guess." Maria's voice trembled. "Will this ever end?" The sheriff's tone grew firm. "Listen carefully. If she keeps this up, she will cross into criminal behavior. That is when the law will step in for good. Keep your heads high." "Do not let her win with fear," Tom nodded. "We will stand firm." News of the trash spread quickly. Some neighbors whispered about it, but many shook their heads, knowing Tom and Maria were not the type to harm the lake. Slowly, support began to grow. Ruth, the older woman down the road, came by with a pie and a gentle word. "Do not give up," she said softly. "We are with you." The more Karen tried to attack, the more people began to see her for who she was. But Karen had one more trick. At the next HOA meeting, which Paul attended, Karen stood before the board and made a bold announcement. She claimed she had spoken to lawyers who believed the HOA had moral authority over all properties around the lake, even if not written into the documents. She proposed raising HOA dues for all members to create a fund for legal action against Tom and Maria. Paul later came to the porch to tell them. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "She's pushing harder. She wants to drag this into court. She's asking people to pay extra money just to fight you." Maria shook her head. "How can people agree to that?" "It is not fair," Paul sighed. "Some are afraid of her. Some do not want conflict, but others are tired. If she pushes too far, she may lose her own support." Tom sat back, staring out at the lake. Then maybe that is the only way. Maybe she has to push until everyone sees the truth. The battle was not just about dues or fences anymore. It was about freedom. It was about whether one voice of control could crush the peace of others. That night, Tom and Maria sat together on the porch, holding hands as the stars lit the sky. They were tired, but they were not broken. Maria whispered, "We came here for peace. We will not leave without it." Tom squeezed her hand. "Then we fight for it with truth on our side." The fight was coming, and it would be bigger than anything they had faced so far, because Karen was preparing to take them to court. The news spread quickly through the small lake community. Karen had hired a lawyer and announced her plan to take Tom and Maria to court. She stood tall at the HOA meeting, declaring that justice was on her side, that no one could be allowed to live outside her rules. Some members clapped politely, but others sat with folded arms, their faces tired of her speeches. Tom and Maria listened to this news from Paul, who came to their porch one evening with his head bowed. "She means it this time. She has filed papers. You will be asked to appear in court." Maria's hands tightened on her apron. "We never wanted this. We only wanted peace." Paul gave her a gentle look. Sometimes peace comes after the storm. Do not lose heart. You have truth on your side. Tom put a steady hand on Maria's shoulder. We will face it. We will not back down. The weeks that followed were filled with preparation. Tom gathered every document, every letter from the county, every photograph of the property line. Maria kept a journal of every event. The dock damage, the trash at the lake, the sheriff's words. Paul, though still an HOA member, gave them quiet support, offering to speak as a witness if needed. The morning of the hearing arrived. The courthouse stood tall with gray stone steps leading to wide wooden doors. Tom and Maria walked up together, their hands joined tightly. Maria wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. Tom wore his best shirt, his face calm but firm. Inside the courtroom, Karen was already seated with her lawyer. She wore a dark suit and clutched her folder like a shield. Her eyes followed Tom and Maria as they entered, sharp and unkind. The judge entered, a man with kind but serious eyes, and the room fell silent. The case was called. Karen's lawyer stood first, speaking of community order and harmony. He painted the HOA as a noble body working to protect the lake and the homes around it. He spoke of dues and shared responsibilities, of unity and fairness. But as he spoke, some neighbors in the back shifted uncomfortably. They knew the words sounded grand, but they remembered the fines, the letters, the threats. When it was Tom's turn, he stood without a lawyer, holding only his papers and his steady voice. "Your Honor," he began, "my wife and I bought our land with the hope of peace. We checked every record before we came. The county confirmed that our property is outside the HOA. We were told clearly that we do not owe dues, that we are not under their rules. We have followed every law, paid every tax, and cared for our land with respect." He laid the documents on the judge's desk. "Here are the maps, the deeds, and the letters from the county." The judge took time to look over the papers. Karen's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge lifted a hand for silence. Maria then stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger as she spoke. "Your Honor, we have been threatened, harassed, and shamed for something that is not true. We love this lake. We protect it. We clean it. We never harmed it. Yet trash was left at our dock to make us look guilty. Workers came to build a fence on our land without permission, and when we said no, the sheriff had to tell them to leave." Her eyes turned to Karen for a brief moment, but she quickly looked back at the judge. "This is not about community spirit. This is about control. And we cannot give up our freedom to someone who does not own our land." The courtroom was silent. Even Karen's lawyer shifted uneasily. The judge leaned back, tapping his fingers on the desk. He looked at Karen. "Do you have proof that their land is part of your association?" Karen stood quickly, her voice sharp. "The board voted. The community agreed. It is about fairness. They use the lake. They live among us. They must follow the same rules." The judge's gaze did not waver. "That is not how property law works. Do you have signed documents, deeds, or county orders that include their land in your HOA?" Karen opened her folder, flipping through pages, but none of them were official. They were letters, board minutes, and newsletters. No legal deeds. No county approvals. The judge's voice grew firm. "This court does not rule on feelings or board votes. This court rules on law. And the law is clear." He held up Tom and Maria's documents. "These papers prove that their property is outside the HOA boundaries. You, Ms. Karen, and your association have no authority over their land. Furthermore, your repeated attempts to force control, including unauthorized construction and harassment, are improper." Karen's face turned pale. She opened her mouth, but the judge raised his hand. "Enough, this case is dismissed. The defendants owe nothing to the HOA. Their property remains free and independent, and let it be known that further harassment will be met with legal consequences." The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the room. Maria let out a breath she had been holding. Tears filled her eyes, but they were tears of relief. Tom placed his arm around her, steady and strong. Paul, sitting in the back, gave a small nod and smile. Other neighbors began to whisper among themselves. Some looked at Karen with disappointment. Others seemed almost free, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Karen gathered her folder, her face tight with anger, and rushed out of the room without a word. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly. Tom and Maria stood on the steps, their hearts light for the first time in many months. The sheriff, who had come to listen quietly, approached them with a smile. "I told you the law was on your side," he said kindly. "Now it is settled." Maria looked at him with gratitude. Thank you, Sheriff. You stood with us when no one else did. He tipped his hat. All I did was my duty. The rest you did yourselves. Paul joined them, clapping Tom on the back. You fought with truth, and truth won. People will remember this. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere around the lake changed. Karen grew quieter, her power shrinking. Some neighbors who had once feared her now spoke more freely. Ruth visited with fresh bread and a smile. Children played by the water without worry of chalk fines or curtain complaints. Tom and Maria's porch became a place of warmth again. Even those who had doubted them came by, offering small words of apology or thanks. One evening, as the sun set over the calm lake, Maria sat with Tom on the dock. The water glowed gold, the air soft with the sound of crickets. She leaned against him. It feels like we can breathe again. Tom kissed the top of her head gently. We stood firm. That is what mattered, Maria smiled. And now we can finally live the peace we came here to find. The lake was still. The stars began to appear one by one, shining over their little piece of land, free at last from unwanted chains. And the lesson spread quietly through the community. True peace is not found in control, but in respect, truth, and freedom.